moment. You recording in progress. The words are said. So, Dr. Baumeister, what an honor. Thank you very much for being here and being available for answering my questions. I have several questions, and as usually it happens with me, I will not get all the answers because I would need, like, I don't know, 2 or 3 years from your lifetime, and maybe we're getting closer to having the answers. But coming back to you, let me give you a very short story how I got here, and maybe find out how you got here to this podcast. I read your book, which is The Self-Explained, and this is going to be the main topic of our today. And usually when I read a book like this, non-fiction books, I like listening to podcasts and hearing what the author, what's the background, why is it coming from, etc. And to be honest, I was missing this kind of discussions for this summer. And I was thinking, András, why don't you write to this guy? Sorry to say like this, and we'll see. Maximum, I will get no response. So what can I lose? And I got a response after one day, and that's the story starts for me here. Okay, how should I behave? Because the very Dr. Roy Baumeister will be here, and to be honest, I have to tell to my audience that you're kind of hero of mine, to be honest, as a psychologist. Yeah. So, and I told to my wife, like Mick Jagger, Rolling Stones, Baumeister is as a psychologist for me in the psychology and science world. So this is how I explain, but maybe it's not the right say to sing like this. And I was thinking, okay, how will I behave? I think I have to be sophisticated, a little bit going down with my temper. Then I was thinking, no, this is not my type of self I usually show. And I was thinking, oh, actually, we're going to talk about the selves. Do we have different selves at all? So now my first question is going to be, and before asking your questions, let me introduce in some sentence you to my audience. Dr. Roy Baumeister, President-elect at International Positive Psychology Association, writer, author of many books, even writer and co-author of many hundreds of articles, as I can tell. And your recent book is The Self-Explained, Why and How We Become Who We Are. This is the book that I'm reading right now, second time. So this was my summer and starting with my autumn because I like reading the books. So my question is, and it's immediate stress, do we have different selves? Am I having different selves? And the first question, what is the self? And I know that you wrote a couple of hundreds of pages about this one, and I'm asking you the $1 million question about what is the self, but let's start at the top. What is the self, and do we have different selves, or it's a kind of illusion? What do you think?
Well, I think the self is real. There are many people have written about the self, and the sort of three broad counts of them. Some people say there's no self, that's an illusion. Some people say, well, you have one self, and others say you have many selves. And now it struck me, each of these has an important insight, an important point.
Yeah.
So we should learn from each of them. But we have one self, and it is real. The people who say there are no self, that it's an illusion, I don't think they really believe it. I noticed they still put their name on their book when they say there's no self. I think I said in the book, if they came home from work and found you in bed with their husband or wife, they would object. And you could say, well, selves are illusions, it doesn't matter, just one person's having sex with someone else, surely there's nothing wrong with that. But they don't really believe it. It's sort of an intellectual exercise. What they're trying to get at is that selfhood is not exactly what it seems. People are mistaken about the self. There's not a physical piece of the brain. It's more something the brain does than that a piece of the brain. As for the multiple self people, well, they don't really quite believe it either. They know people may act differently at different times. They may have different ideas about who they are. when they're at work or when they're talking on a podcast, as opposed to out having beer with their buddies or playing football or whatever.
Yeah.
But these are just different versions of the same self. You're still the same person. And it's not like if I borrowed money from you while I'm at work, and then I saw you when I
Wasn't
was
me.
at home,
Yeah.
and I would say, "Oh no, that's a different self. I don't owe you anything. You know, I'd still owe you the same money." And that gets at a key point. The self derives more from the needs of the social system than from something growing inside the brain. Now, essentially, the self comes into being when the brain uses organized systems to impose unity on the body and on all its activities. I talked about learning to crawl as a step in the development of selfhood. Now, this is pretty simple. Most animals can walk around on all fours, but the brain has to understand. For a child, I remember watching my baby girl learn to crawl.
Yeah.
And it's the right hand and the left knee, the left hand and the right knee. So it has to understand hands and knees, has to understand left and right, and coordinate them alternately.
Yeah, they belong to oneself, to one
They belong
entity.
to oneself.
Yeah.
It's creating the self by using the system to organize them so that they can all work together to move the body around. Now, that gets us as far as animal selves, which are pretty limited. In the human case, we evolved to use culture. Culture is how we solve, all living things have to solve the problems of surviving and reproducing in order to continue life. Otherwise, they go extinct and disappear. Our species solves those problems with culture. We organize our society with culture, and culture benefits from having selves. And so the human self comes into being when the brain learns to operate a role in the social system. So I'm a professor, and so I learned how universities work and how I must function as a professor, and so on. And that's a key part of my identity, of myself. Many other people have different roles, some more complicated, some simpler. Many people are parents, spouses. Now, animals, well, they don't have the formal definition of being a spouse or a parent, but they have sort of natural feelings that do it. But with humans, we carry it farther, that you are officially the spouse of someone. And if you want to separate, if you're an animal, you can just run away. But in humans, you have to get a divorce or take some formal action. Selfhood begins very much with morality. And morality is, again, it's a property of effective social systems. I think of the 10 Commandments of Judaism and Christianity. Most societies have those. A society that had the opposite morals, that it's your moral duty to lie and to kill and to steal and to.
It's hard to imagine that kind of morality, because
morality
is about what's good, what's bad, right? Actually, so if we see
what you can do, it helps the society function well. A society in which people had a moral obligation to kill each other and steal and so on, it would not flourish. It would not survive very long. But you need a self to be moral, to understand the obligations, to make the decisions, to behave in a moral fashion. And so in this way, by learning morality and in particular, maintaining a good moral reputation, we enable society to function better. That's what the essence of the self is learning to participate and take care of yourself within a system, a social system that is complex and that needs certain capabilities. I was just reading, here's another example. It's just reading an article in a management journal by a colleague I know who studies insects. And you think, well, what is he doing? But he talked about ant societies, and he said, well, they have different personalities and different roles, and they work together. You know, they're a big organization. But he says there's one job that no ant has, which is manager or supervisor. Nobody's a boss. The ants do not tell each other what to do. And when you think about it, an organization that has commanders, managers, supervisors can function much better. Some can watch over others, tell them what to do, and get them to produce better, so that the organization does what it's supposed to do. If it's a company, it can manufacture and sell its products. If it's a university, it can teach its students, and so on. But it needs that intermediate level management. So again, humans do this. Other creatures, not so much. And
so we can say that self is connected somehow to culture. So if there's no other people, I'm alone in the deserts, so there's no use to have a self, right? Because
well, you still need, I suppose, to correlate your feet to walk together, you know, the simple animal sense. But
so
most aspects of the self would, most aspects of the self would be gone if you lived alone. You would not even need a name. You need an address, a job title, a reputation. If you owned something, you wouldn't think of it as my cup, or even a cup to drink water.
It's interesting to say what you say, that aspects will be missing. So can we say that it just comes to my back? Because by training I'm biologist, so I'm thinking actually. I think as a human is also an animal, to be honest. So this is how it's no question in this podcast, okay, about this one. So can we say there are different aspects of complexity levels of selfhood? So because you say that for a chimpanzee, for example, or bonobo, or either an ant or human, we all have some kind of aspects of selves, but the complexity and the depth, maybe I'm using the not the wrong word or right word, is different. Can we say this one? So
yes,
self as a human is
greater, partly because the social system is more complex. And the social system is it's our strategy for surviving and reproducing, for solving the basic universal biological questions. We do it with culture, and it works very well. I mean, the human population is increasing. All the other mammals, just about, their populations are decreasing, except maybe a few that we breed for food, and maybe dogs and cats. But other end, our strategy works really well, better than.
But this is. So this is like the answer. This is leading to my next question, and you partly maybe answer this one. So the question, why do we have selves? So this is kind of a evolutionary solution, fitness design that help us humans to strive. Can we say this?
Yes. And the fitness is partly by participating in a successful group. The self does not come to being in the sense that the brain needs to create it, other than, as I said, the basic things of walking and coordinating your limbs. But social coordination is what we need the self for, to have relationships with others. I mean, another point about evolution, to look at it biologically. As I read it, the two big evolutionary advances in humans are communication and cooperation.
And these are connected, actually, very much, right?
Very much connected, yes. And there's a little bit in other animals, but humans do this so much more. And it's partly, you can think of an economic marketplace as a giant exercise in both, because it took me a while to realize this, but trade benefits both parties. Trade is very early in human evolution. It's much older than farming, maybe 10 times as old. So the earliest humans do this. As far as we can tell, other animals do not have marketplaces, do not engage in trade. But it's a kind of cooperation. The seller wants to sell, the buyer wants to buy. If they can find a price that suits both, then they are both better off.
And they are not kins, right? So this is a win-win solution between non-kins, right?
Right. Yes. Other animals have some cooperation among kin, but to cooperate with non-kin, humans are much more advanced in doing that. And of course, if you think of the the worldwide economy, there are hundreds of millions, if not billions, of people taking part, and in general, everyone's better off because of this. It's an exercise in cooperation based on communication, and so that's what the self enabled us to do so much better than other animals, and that's why our population increases while most of the others are decreasing.
It's interesting that just came into my mind. Maybe I was not reading about this one, but you mentioned this communication cooperation thing, and we are talking about Homo sapiens, right? Do you happen to know anything about the Neanderthals? So if you are, thinking about these two species, because they are not here among us in a genetic, I don't know, 3-4% in our genome, but do we know anything about it or not really? About the self?
Okay, well, this is getting outside my own expertise, but I understand, for example, they did not have nearly as much trade. Or what they, that when they look at where they're buried, for Homo sapiens, there are things buried with them that came from far away, suggesting a big, long trading network.
Yeah.
Whereas Neanderthal, what's buried with them is local. It's just from nearby.
I know we are just speculating about this because this cooperation thing came into my mind. That's why I was asking this. So maybe
there are arguments that economists have put forward with computer models, suggesting that the capacity for trade alone was what enabled our ancestors to prevail over the Neanderthals. And I like all these things.
It's interesting. But when we talk about trade, we talk about lots of things, actually. Trade, it means that we can communicate, that we negotiate. There's a theory of mind, what the other things, etc.
Right.
So there's lots of things under the word umbrella trade. So yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. And so all these things had to develop, and these are the makings of the self. So to be a member of a system like this, because the social system will create more resources and everyone can live longer and better.
Yeah. So what we can see more or less, the self is not really a thing, if I might say like this. It's more like a process or a system, as you wrote in your book, which is not easy to understand, to be honest, because this is not how we think about it. Of course, we are not thinking about ourselves like a thing, but actually we cannot find, I don't know, Roy Baumeister in Roy Baumeister's brain. This is the part of the self, and this is what gives the self. It's interconnection. And the process is how you act and interact inside.
Right, as I said, it's something the brain does. It's not something the brain is or part of it is.
Okay, when we are talking about the brain and we talk about self still, what's the difference between our self-concept and the self? Are these things the same thing, or this is our self-concept, thinking about ourself, is just one part, and I don't know, bigger part is missing from our site? Can we say it like this?
I think it's like that. It's one part of it. In fact, in principle, they're not the same. I had the example in the book that a map of France is not the same thing as France.
You happen to be in France now.
Yes,
it's interesting.
Yes, but a concept of the self is not the same thing as the self. The concept of the self is an idea that is a representation of the self. Now, they're not as completely different as that, because the self concept or the knowledge, people don't like the term self concept anymore because it implies you have one concept of self. Instead, people have a lot of different ideas about themselves that are loosely related, but still think of the body of self-knowledge. That's useful. It helps the self to function, but it's knowledge about something, and the something is different. And it also includes your sort of interpersonal position and your relationships and your groups. And it also includes the active part, which makes decisions, controls action, exerts control over oneself as well. If you cover those three, the body of self-knowledge, including starting with self-awareness, on one hand, interpersonal being the second, and the executive, if you will, the decision-making, action controlling part is the third. That's a pretty good map of the self. But the self-concept alone is not. And many people confuse them, which has created all sorts of difficulties.
What just came into my mind, you were talking about map. Let's talk about the map. I feel like sometimes there's something on the map which is really missing from ourselves, but we want to believe in that it's in ourselves, but actually we are writing it like an author. Am I right? So it doesn't mean that we just partly we see what is true, but actually we see sometimes things that are, well, not that close to reality, if you understand what I mean. Can it happen?
That's certainly right. There's a long chapter on accuracy of self-knowledge. How well do people know themselves? And well, they're not completely wrong, but they're far from completely right. I don't think anyone's completely right. And there are strong biases and distortions. People forget things. And notice we talked about too, why do people deceive themselves? I sometimes think about that. I might as well always tell myself the truth. I might lie to other people, but people deceive others, but people deceive themselves because it helps them deceive others better.
Yeah, if you lie to yourself and you believe it, that's the best way to deceive others, right?
Yes, the best actors are those who really believe themselves to be that person at that time.
Yeah.
You have to feel it and believe it, and then it's sincere, and other people will go along with it. With the distortions in self-knowledge, people don't think they're God. Well, maybe a few do.
Some.
Most people, they seem to think they're a little better than they are. There's a pervasive pattern of moderate positive distortion.
Yes.
And I even wonder about that because it seems sometimes people can give pretty accurate answers. The idea of that there are multiple selves, I think what they actually meant is that people have multiple concepts of themselves. And that's certainly true. You have different versions of yourself in your mind. And I said, well, what is the most important one? What you think of yourself is really not so important as compared to what other people think of you. And so
reputation.
The conclusion that the desired reputation, how you want other people to view you, that is the most powerful and important of your various concepts of yourself. And so when people, they ask you, how would you rate your ability at this and that, and you're getting along with people, you find people rate themselves a little bit better than is quite justified. But maybe that comes from the desired reputation. I'm not going to convince anyone that I'm Jesus Christ or some Albert Einstein or anyone like that. But maybe I want people to think I'm a little better than I am. So something that's sort of within reach, that I could be at my best. And so they respond on that basis, and that produces this pattern of moderate inflation in how favorably people rate themselves. So,
but this is again connected somehow to our fitness, evolutionary background, adaptation.
Yes.
So when we talk about, if we say distortion, it's coming from the view from the truth, but if we are thinking about how we get ahead in life about our fitness, this distortion is needed, because if I remember well, those who see the reality in its closest to the objective true selves are people in depression, right? Sometimes
there's plenty of evidence of that, yes.
Yeah, and nobody wants to be depressed, of course, and nobody wants to be close to people who are depressed. So we want to be with people who are laughing, enjoy themselves, and we need this kind of positive distortion and way of thinking about ourselves, because this is how we can, with this hope, we can think about the future. If you think, oh my God, the world is too complex to understand just 1% of this one, then I can kill myself now, and that's all. So I won't do that. Just I think so. So from one point it's distortion, but from other point, actually, this is what is needed if we think of
Well, that's
evolution,
what I
right?
say. It's both. It's an adaptive distortion.
Hmm.
Um,
Exactly.
Psychologists for a long time thought that mental health meant seeing reality exactly as it is, and they wondered, well, how can we do therapy with depressed people to get them to stop twisting everything and seeing the world the way it is? And then they realized, oh, maybe the problem is depressed people are seeing the world as it is. We need to not get them to see more accurately. We need them to learn to get these slight positive illusions
Yeah.
that normal, healthy, happy people seem to have.
You know what's even worse? I had a discussion with a physicist, and if we talk about the quantum physics, and that's the part, what is reality? I'm not an expert in this one. I can get lost in this one. And they say that actually what we see, it's really far from reality, because if you're thinking of electromagnetic fields, and what we see actually a very tiny part, what we can perceive with our eyes, what we can hear, if you just compare with bats and whales and elephants. So reality is a much bigger concept, and reality for humans, if you like it, is much more smaller. So I don't want to go to this field, but the objectivity and reality, it's really hard for me to really understand what we are talking about this one. But coming back to the topic you mentioned, and I also wanted to mention the concept of true self. I have some friends that said, oh, sorry about what I did yesterday when we had the tennis match. I didn't mean that. It's not me. I usually I don't act like that. And actually, I think it's him, but he doesn't like.
Yes.
So in this one, so do we have true selves, authentic selves, or this is again a kind of illusion?
Well, I struggled with this a lot. I read lots of the research and put things together. I think the idea of the true self is a false myth, and it originates in just what you said, that people do things and they want to say, "Well, that's not me."
Yeah.
Again, they're concerned about their having a good reputation, especially a moral reputation. So they want people to look at them in this positive way. And well, most people occasionally do things that are not consistent with that, but they want to say, well, that's not me. In fact, sometimes they think other people pressured me to act this way,
Yes.
but that was a false self, or it was false to myself. Well, the falseness is there, even though some argue that, well, you still did those things. It's
Yes.
really you. So the idea of a self that's separate from everything you do and think and feel, that seems highly questionable to me. Also, logically, the fact that there are false selves doesn't mean that there's one true self. And again, true may not be so much in that there's some reality, some metaphysical thing inside you. It may be more true to the reputation you are trying to create. Remember, the desired reputation, that's the goal. There's a wonderful series of articles published a year or two ago on authenticity and looking at all the research. And several people attempted to make sense of it. And one thing is that this true self, there are big problems with them taking it seriously as a true self, but people want to believe in it, and it's more a goal than a description of a reality. The true self is the self you want to be. For example, in all the research, when they talk to students and so on, the true self is always good.
Yeah.
And so that's already questionable. How can your true self not have any bad traits? But as your goal, the person you want to be, it would have all good traits. Yes, that's quite understandable. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, but I have a counterfact to this one, because I can imagine some people in Germany in the 40s, when their true self wanted to act against the Jews, and they believed in their true self, which is, I think, morally we would say it's bad. But if you think of their
We would say
goals,
that. I don't know if they would.
no.
That many of them believed it was their duty and that it was helping the nation reach its potential and so on. The concentration camps, the death camps, were run by the SS, who were very chosen for the highest moral character and so on. It was not the dregs of society and the mean criminals and bastards who they sent out to run these things. It was the finest young men and perhaps some women that they could find. So on their side, that was virtue. This is something else I've been thinking and learning about. I think Sapolsky's book made the point that morality evolved for the in-group. That it's to regulate how you deal with the people in your group, people outside the group. And as I read about early humans, it's often very much true that one thing that struck me, I read a history of the Comanches. It was an Indian.
Yes,
it was like a nation. So they existed in small groups out in the big empty lands in the western Texas and so on. And they would travel around. Occasionally they would meet another group of Indians. And if it was Comanches, they would, okay, we are the same. And we would talk to each other and have a party and maybe have some marriages and share information and have a feast. If it was Apaches, anything goes. Kill the men, rape the women, steal the children and make them slaves, take all their things. So morality applies when you're dealing with people in your own group, people outside of your group. Morality doesn't naturally resonate. Now, in the modern world, we think of universal morality, and you and I might have moral obligations to people in other parts of the world that we've never seen that are completely different. But this is a new, advanced philosophical idea. It is not how we evolved.
Very new, very recent, and it's not true for everybody, to be honest. Right. I guess in your country and in my country too. So it's for some people who have more openness to experience, so more open worldview. We might think more cosmopolitan humankind as one. But if you go to a football match, whatever, sometimes you don't feel, but you are even in one country, and these two football teams, I don't know, work 10 kilometers far from each other, and they can kill one another. That was a story of some of the anthropologists, I don't remember where I read it. They were walking, I don't know, 30 years ago in Indonesia, and they were hearing somebody from another tribe walking, and he said, let's say hello to the guy from another tribe. And he said, from this tribe, are you mad? He might kill us. And he was, yes. Why would he kill us? Because maybe it's not the same, I don't know, in San Diego, California, or Budapest, Hungary, but there it's like Comanche is what you mentioned. It's like this one. So coming back to the true self thing, which I don't also cannot really relate to this one, because it's so intact. It's not malleable. It's like something that you find and it's there, and it cannot change. And I cannot really rate myself to this one, but I can relate to the true self concept, the true self, to my beliefs. So what I want to reach, what's my goal. And if I behave like this is how I act in my neighborhood, then maybe I can reach that point. And that's if I act like that it's my true self. If I act out of this role, then it's not. So it helps me to have a inner helping hand. So this is the direction you have to go, and this is not the direction you have to go. So maybe we can say it like this. Mm-hmm. So my question, maybe I'm not right, but I'm 46, but in these 46 years, in the last 25 years, I see that people's interest, maybe I talk about people in Western societies, the so-called Western societies, it's like we are more interested in psychology books, pop psychology, in ourselves, reading magazines, books about it. And I quite often think about, why is that? Is it connected to our recent God is Dead from Nietzsche, that way of thinking? Is it that we can reach so many roles in our lives? Like you wrote in your book, I know 500 years ago, there was not a question. You were born to be an architect, or I don't know, or a smith, and you were dead 40 years later as a smith, and it was no question. You will not become a duke or I don't know, a duchess, something like this. So do you see the same thing? Do you believe that we are looking much more, we are interested much more in ourselves these years, a couple of decades? And the question is why? If the answer is yes to the first question, what do you think?
Yes, I think the self has become much more of a problem. There are more possibilities, and then you need to find ways to choose among them. What do you want to do? Like you said, if you were born to be a blacksmith, or 500 years ago, most people were farmers, so that was it. And there was little or no chance to be anything else. But now, a student at 20 years old can go to the university and take any one of many different courses and pursue careers off of that. So the options for who you are, and again, this is not something inside you, it's how you're going to fit into society. Mm-hmm. The self is the interface between the animal body and this cultural society. But you have to have a job, you have to have some way to get food. So you need to find inside yourself some basis for whether you want to be, as you said, an architect or a blacksmith or a professor or whatever. And the answer is not objective. Lots of different people make different choices. So you've got to find some basis inside yourself. Another issue is social relationships. Again, the self is there for social relationships. Most of the world, most of history, you lived with the same people your whole life. I saw one historian estimate that in Europe in the Middle Ages, the average person out in a farming village might see 100 other people in his entire lifetime.
Lifetime, 100 people.
Yeah, that seems low to me, but even if it were 300, you can see more people than that walking down a big city street in 10 minutes today. And the more important thing is not the number that you visually encounter, but the ones you have relationships. We cooperate. That's again the big human trait. We work together with others. We marry. We work on projects together, and so on. So in the ancient world, you were set in these, and unless soldiers came and conquered you and made you a slave, in which case you had another set of relationships, but that was also beyond your control. But now people come and go, we live longer, we have different jobs and careers, multiple marriages, families. So the self is more unstable in terms of its linkage to these various close relationships. One of the big differences in cross-cultural research on the self emphasizes that in Western Europe and North America, and I guess Australia, people think of the self as more independent, whereas say in Eastern Asia, China, Japan, and so on, people think of the self as embedded in relationships. Well, we all used to be that way, embedded in relationships, and the Western Europe moved away from that. But you need different properties of the self for that, and I think again it derives from the stability of social relations. If you're stuck with the same people your whole life, they know who you are, and even if you don't like them, you still have to get along with them. Yes. That's why you want to be modest and not make trouble and think about the group and so on. But say in a modern American or Western European marriage, the person could get a divorce and leave you and you'd be on your own. Your employer might decide they can't afford you anymore and get rid of you and you need a new job. So the self has to constantly struggle to maintain its integration in society, and always know all relationships are tentative, and you might need to find new ones. That's one reason why the Americans and the Europeans tend to be more positive about themselves than the Chinese and the Japanese. It's not clear they really think badly of themselves, but humility is good for getting along with same people, especially if you don't necessarily like them. Whereas being positive about yourself is good for attracting new partners, which is part of the social life in the Western civilization.
So it means that it's quite a recent phenomenon. So we are talking about, my question is, do we actually win or lose in this? Because we are talking about so many self options, much higher social mobility. So this is very current things, right, in our history. But on the other hand, we are actually losing this coherent identity. So my question is, on mental side, are we actually gaining or losing by this?
Well, that's a profound question, and it's not easy to answer that. I mean, the way I think about it sometimes is the ideal life would be to have permanent relationships with a group of people who are just perfectly matched to you, who suit you, have the same values and tastes and like you and all those things. But that's not possible. So you either settle for the permanence or for getting the right people. Getting the right people means you get rid of those that don't work and you get new ones. It also means some of them will get rid of you.
So who's going to change that?
There's the cost there, more anxiety and uncertainty. The permanence means you've got these people forever, so you don't have to worry about being left alone and abandoned, but they're not necessarily the people you want to be with. So, which is better? Well, there's clearly gains and losses either way. If I try to answer the question of which is better, and I'm reluctant to do that, but I would incline to look at data and how do people move and how do things change. It seems like they change toward more individualistic, more toward the Western style, as the long-term global trend is in that direction. And also people in individualistic societies are somewhat happier than others. So we definitely gain and we definitely lose, but maybe we gain a little bit more than we lose in shifting to the individualistic style. But that's an average across giant populations. Many people are worse off and would be better off with the other system. What happens is the Westerners get this nostalgia and imagine that if you could live in a collectivistic society, it would be much happier and less anxiety and all that. Well, maybe there'd be less anxiety over being alone, but I don't think they're right that they're happier. The people I know who've lived in both say they'd much rather live in the individualistic society, partly because when it's the small community, everyone knows everyone else, pays attention to everyone else, everyone involved in everyone else's business. So you don't have as much privacy and people are controlling you and you feel more freedom and so on when you go instead to an individualistic one. One of my friends talk about that whenever he goes back and forth between the collectivistic country he came from and his new home in England. He says, I feel such a relief to get out there and suddenly nobody's checking every little thing about me. And
it's the same, I guess, here in Hungary. Also, if you go to a village and you are in a big town like Budapest, it's much different, and there are pros and cons. I know this question is hard, so I was not really expecting to answer black or white to this one. I think it's good just thinking about it, because the way I think about it, it's not really a decision that we made, because by technology, by social and physical mobility, that we can fly, I don't know, in 1 hour from here to across Atlantic to US, etc. So actually, this is the direction that you cannot stop, right? So this kind of mobility. So it's not a decision that we decided from now on we will not have villages. We move to the towns, and now on we move from towns and we will, I don't know, travel around the world. These things just happen, and then we adapt to this one somehow. Some people adapt it better. Some don't adapt it better. So this is why I have a problem with this one. It's not really our decision, and this identity crisis. Maybe it's too harsh word, identity crisis, But I see that there's a problem with this one, because sometimes it's much more easier to say, like, I'm a doctor, okay, that's all. I don't have to tell you hundreds of things. But nowadays, I also teach, I also professor at the university, and we always tell to our students, guys, you will maybe change your, I don't know, profession 4 times in your lifespan in the next 50 years. And I'm not sure that everybody loves this, because it's it's uncertain. We like certainty, and it's uncertain, right. And you have to be adaptive to this one.
That's been an interesting change in Western society in the last year. My father and my sister both had business careers, and my father worked for the same company, and from the beginning till he retired. He had several jobs as he was promoted, but he worked for one, whereas my sister must have worked for half a dozen different ones.
Yes. So it's very interesting. So, there's no question here. We just talked about this one, because I don't think that we can really have an answer, because we are very close. As I usually say, we are reading the book like this. It's not possible. We are too close. Maybe historians with 200 years can tell what happened in these years, actually, because we don't really have the data on this one. Right. So, but it sounds interesting for me. And you mentioned individualism, right? And you also mentioned in your book, if I remember well, that privacy, for example, and this kind of thing, I don't know, 500 years ago was not that obvious. Even you were talking about or writing about the houses, how the houses were architected. So we didn't really have corridors, etc. So privacy was much more different, like it is now.
Yes. The French historian made the bold claim that before the 17th century, nobody was ever left alone. That line
which sounds weird these times.
It's probably a little bit exaggerated, but still, I think you take away the exaggeration. The basic point
Let me just give you a point. Sorry, interrupting you. Yesterday, I had a conversation at a big company, multinational company, and the guy mentioned me. Look, how you say the word now? It's in Germany. Germany, they wanted to buy a house and some money from the bank, and they didn't get the money from the bank. Why? Because they didn't have in the house, in the plan of the house, separate rooms for the 3 kids, because they have to have separate rooms. They cannot stay together in one room. Why?
Yes.
I'm still alive. I was together with my brother. But the way of thinking and the way of how the administration works, even so, we think that the privacy is needed, and we have to give it to our sons and daughters. It's very interesting, isn't it?
Yes. If we go back a century or more, when there were large families, the children not only had to share a room, they had to share a bed.
Even bed.
In the same bed, yes, until they got big. Yes, the desire for privacy. And another thing, who is alone? Well, it's the really rich people who pay a lot for privacy, and they live in a community with gates around it and guards controlling access, and so they really, have at least a retreat where they can get away from society. I always look at the difference between the US and Europe in this regard, because Europe obviously is much older, and it goes back to when there really was not much to do at home. So
why would you stay at home, right? You go to the pub.
Why would you stay at home? You'd go out to a bar or a parlor or something, and just talk to people and have a beer and just
that was the concept of living room, right?
Right. Yes, but America much newer and doesn't have that historical background, and pretty soon there got to be nice things to do at home. So people now go home and stay home in the evenings. I remember one of my friends married a Korean woman, and he brought her then to live in the U.S. in New Jersey. And he said she got very depressed because she was just home. She had 2 children, but they didn't know what to do to make the time pass. They said when a car would drive by, they would all rush to the window to watch the car go by.
Oh my God!
She
cultural differences.
Yes, she was used to living in Korea where there were a lot of people together and all the women were there. And if they wanted to go off, there's always somebody there to watch the children. And all day you'd be talking, and I don't know what else they did, play cards or whatever. But suddenly being alone is a stressful adjustment for people like
Yeah.
that.
To be honest, sometimes I miss it. I have two children. I really enjoy being alone and reading, but it's another question, I guess.
Yes,
Here. So,
yes.
can we say, Dr. Baumeister, that if we think of the human evolution, that we are heading towards individualism, and we are in different levels globally? Because somewhere I read, maybe it was also in your book, that even in China, there's getting more and more individualism. So because when we talk about Eastern societies, it's much less about individualism. Does it mean that we no longer need the help of so many people? We are better off alone, or it's not really like that?
I don't think it means that. I mean, we need the help in different ways, but we still are dependent on others. Like I said, I'm a professor. I can't get my own food or build my own home or anything like that. I have a very
Yes.
nice home and I eat very well, but I don't get it from nature. I perform this very particular job in a giant system where I go to the university and I teach classes and I do research and all the other things that go on. And because of that, I get some money which I can use then to pay for food and shelter, which is made by people much more competent than I am. I'm glad I don't have to get my own food and shelter, because I would be living very badly and eating very poorly. I don't have any skills like that. So we are still highly interdependent
Yes.
on each other. We need others, but perhaps not as much, or not in the same ways you need them when everyone is poor and you're struggling to get by. And yes, there does seem to be a global movement toward greater individualism, even in places like China. I don't know the China data specifically, but I suspect so. But probably that comes with adjustments to the modern world. And as I said, people seem to be a little happier that way. And I don't know what all the other driving factors are. Maybe it works better
Yes.
in the social system.
I was just wondering about it, because when we talk about individualism and selves, I think it sounds like that. That was why I was asking this one. So getting closer to the end of our conversation, I was thinking, why is it important, or is it important or helpful for us to read about these topics, trying to know more about ourselves? So we being open to self-knowledge, does it help anything in our life, or it's actually just reinforcement that we are good people and we find it in other books that yes, we are on the right track? So is it needed? Is it important to read about self-knowledge in this kind of books? What do you think about it? Of course, I'm in a different league. I'm very much interested in this one. But is it important for humans to do things and read these things, or not really?
Well, I think trying to understand the human condition and what's our life about and what does it mean and what should we be doing. This is very fundamental, and it comes more in the modern life where we have multiple opportunities. So understanding self and identity is useful information to help you live a better life. Understanding yourself, well, a lot of people are very interested in that, and the appetite. I mean, people look at the horoscopes of astrology and all sorts of things to give them self-knowledge, they hope. So people have an appetite for it. Again, I think the important thing is getting along with others. We evolved to relate to others and communicate and cooperate. That's what our lives are very much about, on the way toward finding a role and earning a living and having a family if you want one, and all those things. So is not just what you think of yourself, but that's useful for learning how to relate to others, which in the long run will enable you to take care of yourself and your family if you have one.
So when you learn about yourself, actually, it's really connected to the connection with others and your interactions. So actually, it's not just about yourself; it's about everybody around you. So if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, yes, and you might convince yourself you're a great musician, but
Yes, I am. Just
okay, good. But if nobody else thinks so, then you're probably not.
Yeah.
To be a great musician, you have to get at least some other people.
Yeah, you can tell that you're a great guitar player, but if nobody thinks the way like this, so
Right.
yeah, exactly.
And so again, it's your own opinion of yourself is not the main thing that matters. It helps, to
Yes.
believe that you can become a great guitar player or whatever. That might help you do all the hard work that's required to get there. But still, the ultimate test will be, do other people say, wow, you're a great guitar player?
Yes. I also like playing the guitar. I read somewhere that you are also into guitar playing or used
Yes,
to.
I did for a long time. I'm getting old and my thumbs don't have arthritis, and so it's hard. I wondered when I was a boy, my mother played the trumpet in jazz
Oh,
bands. She was good, and she would take me to see these old people playing. I would see these 80-year-old men playing trumpets and trombones and all that, but no guitars. I wonder, where are all the old guitarists? But now I realize your fingers start to get arthritis and don't work as well. Even John McLaughlin, who I think is the greatest jazz guitarist, he has to quit because of arthritis. Can't play anymore.
maybe we have to choose bass. I mean, less strings, maybe easier.
Less strings, but I don't know. I still think it might be harder. The
It's
strings
different.
got thicker.
It's different. It's a different
Yeah.
different instrument. Absolutely. Dr. Baumeister, thank you very much. Is there something that we were missing, we are not talking about? Because of course there are lots of things we are not so well, and it's in the book, the self-explained, as I mentioned. But is there something that you want to mention, or not really, that we didn't cover, haven't covered?
Well, I don't know. It's a rich topic. I think we covered a lot. I hope. I'm sorry about the siren outside.
No problem. We are not alone in the world. Here is the sign for that.
Yes. Should I repeat that last answer?
No, I heard it very
Okay.
well. No problem. Yeah.
Okay, good. No, I think it's good. The self is real, but it's something the brain does. The brain learns to operate a role in the social system. That's what being a human being is all about. Working together with others to create society, to create food and shelter and water and resources so that life can increase.
Dr. Baumeister, thank you very much for this conversation. I really highly recommend your book. So I think this is fantastic. Usually the way I read books and then I read the site, what you mentioned, other books, other articles. So I go in the depth of this never-ending loop. I think this is really good opportunity for that too. Hopefully it will be translated to our language in the future. I will mention it to my publisher. So thank you very much for writing this book. Thank you very much for being available for this conversation. And I cannot tell you really how much I was honored to be with you for this 1 hour. So thank you very much. Have a nice month or weeks in France there.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Okay, that's it. I think I stopped the recording. Was everything okay?